Hey friends, Chapter 6, Section 2, Religion, Philosophy, and the Arts. This video will cover a time period known as the Golden Age of Athens, briefly. Whoopsies. A later video will talk more about that. And we'll also discuss Greek religion, philosophy, and the arts. So this video talks about kind of who the Greeks were and what they did. And we'll start off with perhaps one of the most important legacies I noted that the Greeks talked about earlier is this idea of a democracy. There was a historian named Thucydides who wrote later on in a book about the Peloponnesian War, which we'll talk about, that Greece and Athens specifically had a limited form of government and a constitution, kind of like a rule book. And if you look at this quote from the text, it talks about things that are kind of like borrowed from and used in many other governments, like the US Constitution. It says then it is called a democracy. It favors the many instead of the few, and it gives equal justice to all. And the Greeks will inspire the Romans, who will inspire the Europeans after a while, and then will eventually inspire the Americans too. So if you want to look at just like the kind of best example of how what happened in Greece was later borrowed on, you can look at the Parthenon and you can look at the White House. Like the architecture styles are very, very similar. So one of the major themes then of this video is that Greek thought and culture would spread across much of the world, at least in the what's kind of referred to as Western civilization. So I put the picture of Mr. Bean here because like here's the Greeks doing a bunch of things, and here are going to be people that are going to borrow them. The Greeks are some of the first people to do it, and it's pretty cool. It's definitely this guy too, Pericles, who was an Athenian statesman. So before that, though, the last video, I always kind of find this interesting. When we think about the Mycenaeans and like what happened in Troy, the fall of Troy was about 1250 BCE ish. We're not certain exactly, and like Socrates was born 470. I think this is Socrates here drinking his poison, but there's like 800 years in between what happened here and what happened here. So definitely a longer history. Remember, we had the Dark Ages of Greece in there too. So the Golden Age of Athens, it's called a dynasty because for a while, some really, really cool things were happening in Athens. So just like Michael Jordan's dynasty, Athens had its dynasty from about 479 to 431 BCE, is when all kinds of different cultural aspects of Greece were created and formed. Um, a later video will talk about the Delian League and how that helped it to grow and prosper. All of these states that are in yellow would eventually have to pay tribute to Greece. So there was definitely a lot of money rolling in. The treasury was formed on the island of Delos. We'll talk about that later. Democracy in a limited form is practiced. We'll talk a lot this year about how no democracy is perfect. The Athenians certainly didn't have a perfect democracy, but under some circumstances, some groups of people could vote. As our text shows, here's one of the tablets. You can elect your own leader. And the Parthenon was completed in 438 BCE. You can visit that today. I tried to piece together the two pictures from our textbook on different pages. But here is kind of the ruins of what this Greek world looked like in Athens. I think our text does a really good job showing the different elements of Greece that you can still visit in Athens today. The Parthenon served as a temple to Athena. So yeah, Athens, Golden Age, its dynasty, all of that stuff happened during this time period. Greek religion. I don't really have a great understanding of Greek religion, but the Greeks had like families of gods who all control different things. Zeus, of course, being the ruler of all gods and humanity. We saw when we looked at the Iliad that the Greeks more or less believed, that the gods who are up here in the clouds would intervene on behalf of the humans. So the gods would favor certain groups of people. Like in the beginning of the Trojan War, we saw how there was quarrels on the gods. Should they support the Mycenaeans? Should they support the Trojans? And back and forth too. So here was a list of the different gods: Zeus, Hera, Apollo, and here it talks about what they were the god of. So our text also shows Greek gods and goddesses like Poseidon, Athena, Apollo, Artemis, King Aegeus, consulting a priestess at Apollo's oracle. An oracle was a site where Greek rulers would travel to, and they would look for a sign from one of their gods and goddesses about what to do or maybe what not to do. So our vocab word can be immortal, meaning they live forever. The Greeks believe that these gods and goddesses were immoral and that they lived forever. Philosophy. Three really, really famous philosophers. Socrates, I think this is him again because eventually he would be executed and he had to drink poison. Plato and Aristotle. Here, Plato and Aristotle are depicted in the School of Athens by Raphael. A philosopher is someone who believed that people could use the powers of the mind and reason to understand natural events. So in the past, if there was like a plague or if there was no rain for a long time period, the people would say, oh, the gods and goddesses are angry. But Greek life differed in ways that philosophers started to say, well, actually, let's see if we can understand the world by observing it. Again, they would just say, oh, the gods control everything. But, I guess for seventh graders, we can say, like, these guys thought, well, maybe there's something else to it. A little recap of what each one was famous for. Socrates, his famous phrase is "Know thyself," and he traveled around Athens and encouraged the youth to think for themselves, more or less. Eventually, he was put on trial by the Athenians and forced to drink poison. That's why I think this is him here, for corrupting the mind of the youth, then, too. So, and again, this is just a really quick snapshot of all three of these guys. So, Socrates, know thyself. Plato wrote the Republic. He was a student of Socrates. So, all three of these guys, well, Socrates knew Plato, and Plato knew Aristotle. So I say SPA, SPA. And Aristotle later on would go on to tutor Alexander the Great, which is pretty cool too, a major conqueror. So all three of these guys knew each other, or SPA in the order that they lived. And again, important because Greek thought and culture is going to spread across much of the world. Literally, in my college class a couple weeks ago, we're still reading Aristotle and saying, all right, what did he write about? How can he teach us? So again, people are going to borrow um, from the Greeks, from Greek thought. The arts, really cool. The Greeks are some of the first people to like have plays and depictions and like try to do different shows that people could watch. We can see the ruins still today of theaters. This is, to our knowledge, some of the first time that it would happen. You can see in our text too, some of these words, Greek words, show that the Greeks liked to go and watch shows like orchestra. Sophocles is really cool. Wrote Antigone, which is a really, really cool story. Oedipus the King, Electra. These are three works. Antigone is a story about a girl who disagrees with the ruling of a king and stands up to her, and Electra too. So how can we connect this to our world? I literally saw a play of Antigone a couple months ago in Ann Arbor. So we're still impressed with what the Greeks did and what they wrote, and it's still forming as entertainment for us today. I think that's the last slide. Yeah, cool. Thanks for watching.